All right, welcome back. Pretty tired today. Didn't sleep too well. So hopefully my ability to communicate is still all right. But I've been thinking about something, a topic that came up on a podcast I was on recently, which should be out later this week. So when it does come out, I'm assuming I'll make another video around that time. I'll tell you where to find it. But the topic was fear, which is something that definitely is it can be an underlying factor in most people's lives. For some people, it's definitely a more prominent thing. It's much more visible, or it's much easier to sense. But I think for the majority of people, it's at very least an underlying feeling. There's always an underlying feeling of fear and anxiety of something. Who knows what that is exactly, but there's something that they fear, something that makes them anxious. And it's not an acute thing. It's a chronic problem. It doesn't go away easily. It sticks around, and it gets worse. As you don't put any action into ridding yourself of it, it festers and grows. Fear does. So, what we used to use against fear were stories. For humans, it was stories. We used to tell stories of brave men and women conquering fear. And usually, it wasn't a story about fear itself, but as something that represented fear. I mean, you could just think of I guess if we're using an example from Jordan Peterson, like a dragon. You know, going to the dragon's lair and killing it before it comes to harm you or your family, your village. So we used to have those stories, and we used to tell them often as humans because they're uplifting and they remind us of what we need to do, which is fight the problem, go to it, and don't let it hurt us or the people we love. But nowadays we don't tell those stories. And even though we have a much better means of telling those stories through movies, the quality of movies just suck nowadays. And they're often, even the movies that follow along like a basic hero's journey type story, they're not good. They don't do a good job of representing the hero's journey or telling the story in general. So we don't have that anymore. Which means we have to look back to the past and find those stories again that we can look to for a little bit of motivation and for a little bit more context as to how we can rid ourselves of fear. For me, a story that I bring up often for many different topics applies to fear as well. And that's the story of the Count of Monte Cristo. The Count of Monte Cristo, or Edmond Dantes, his actual name, is a story about a young man who, at the beginning of the story, he's 19 years old. He has it all. He really does have it all. He just got a brand new job as the captain of a merchant ship called Le Pharaon. And keep in mind, this is early 1800s Napoleon era France. So he just becomes captain of Le Pharaon. He is going to get engaged to the woman he loves, Mercedes. So he has it all. He feels great. Life is going great for him. But the people around him are jealous. one of the other men working closely with him on the Pharaon gets jealous that Edmund now has the role of captain on the ship. And Edmund Dante's friend, Fernand Mondego, his best friend, who also worked on the ship with him, has been jealous of him for quite a long time because Fernand also loves Mercedes. And so once Edmund gains the role of captain, and it's clear that his life is going in a very good direction, and it will continue to do so for quite a long time. He's going to marry Mercedes. These men, 3 men, come together to betray him and ruin his life. Because on the way, on one of their journeys out to sea, the reason why Edmund became captain is because their captain died, and they had to stop at the island of Elba, where Napoleon Bonaparte was exiled. And while they were there, Napoleon gave Edmund a letter, which he was supposed to give to another man when he got back to France. And Napoleon told Edmund not to tell anybody about this letter, but that the contents were completely innocent and that it was just some writings to a friend in France, which was clearly not true. So when Edmund got back to France, Fernand found out about that letter, and he told the man who could have been captain instead of Edmund about that letter. And so they conspired together with another man to have Edmund sent to prison. That way, the man who could have been captain would become captain, and Fernand would get Mercedes. So they go to a man who can actually get Edmund sent to prison, and they trick him. So Edmund gets sent off to the Chateau d'If, which is the equivalent of a maximum security prison, where he is going to likely spend the rest of his life. It's assumed that he will. And for 6 years, the first 6 years he's there, he just rots away. Every day is full of sorrow and dread. All that he had is gone, and he knows he's innocent. And on the anniversary of his imprisonment, every year, he was whipped. He was whipped. Just so that the warden could remind him that it's been another year. That's the only way he could really keep track of time. So he rots away for the first 6 years, and then a priest, Abbe Faria, I believe was his name, ends up digging a tunnel into Edmund's cell by accident, by complete accident. His goal, obviously, was to dig out of the prison, out of the Chateau d'If, so that he could escape. But he miscalculated the direction and dug into Edmund's cell. Well, this was actually a blessing for Edmund, because over the next 8 years, the priest and Edmund would work together to build another escape tunnel. And at the same time, the priest was teaching Edmund how to read, how to write, mathematics, history, economics, chemistry, hand-to-hand combat, sword fighting. I mean, so many different things, a vast array of skills. And that's what kept Edmund going. Before, he had been full of fear, completely filled with fear those first 6 years. And no doubt there was still quite a bit of fear in those remaining 8 years he was in prison before he managed to escape. But those skills, the skills and the vision that came with those skills of escaping and building a better life, And revenge is part of the story as well. But that's what helped him overcome the fear and escape. That's what brought him out of it. That's what lifted him up. And so after those 8 years, when he gets the chance to escape, finally, 14 years had passed. Everybody had forgotten him. They assumed he was dead. But then he acquires a large amount of wealth by a miracle, really. And then with all these skills he now has, he is able to completely orchestrate his life in a incredibly rare and effective way because of all those skills he has. And that lifts him completely out of fear. He completely reinvents himself because of it. And I think I bring up this story so much, the story of the Count of Monte Cristo, so much because there's so many good things about it. But for this specific example, it's getting over fear, and that the way to do it is to find something that gives you hope. Something that completely overpowers any sense of fear. And I think the ultimate form of hope, or what can give you the most hope, is the person you can become. Figuring out who you can become and doing the things you have to do to become that person. That's the ultimate way to overcome it. And there's another good book, which I really like, by Napoleon Hill, which Napoleon Hill wrote a very famous book called Think and Grow Rich. But he wrote another book that a lot of people aren't as familiar with, and that's Outwitting the Devil. And that's a fantastic book. That book is absolutely fantastic because in it, he's having a conversation with the devil. And he gets the devil to admit all the things he does to bring people to fear. And the devil admits that what he wants to do is to make people live stagnant, unintentional lives and have them become drifters, where they don't pursue anything, they don't do anything. There is no hope. There is no meaning, no reason behind anything. That's his main goal. And in the book, Napoleon Hill gets the devil to admit the 6 fears that the devil uses against people to bring them to being stagnant and not doing things in their life. And those fears are the fear of loss of love, the fear of death, the fear of illness, the fear of poverty. I gotta look at the rest of them. Actually, I have notes on it. Fear of poverty, fear of criticism, fear of illness, fear of loss of love, fear of growing old, and fear of death. That's what the main 6 fears are. And if you analyze your own fears, you can probably put one of them or all of them in one of those categories. It's very strange. So you should read that book, honestly. You really should, because then you get a framework of fear. And even if you're not religious or any of that, it's good to have that framework which points to fear coming from a evil source, which to me seems obvious that it does, because it's irrational to be constantly fearful of things that are not actual threats to you, and to be in constant fear like I think a lot of most people are. It just doesn't make sense, and it does drive people to inaction and to meaningless lives. So to me, it does seem to come from an evil source. But the point is, you gotta have something that overpowers it, that overcomes it in a way that is is intentional and meaningful and is the most meaningful thing you can think of, which likely is becoming someone and doing impressive, valuable things in pursuit of becoming the person you want to be. That's what's going to overcome it. There's really not much else I can think of that is going to aid you in ridding yourself of fear for any significant amount of time if you don't have an idea, a why, a picture of who you want to be. Because most likely that person you want to be, that man you want to be, is someone free from fear. Someone who doesn't fear, someone who is unperturbed by the difficulties and the natural difficulties of life that we all face. Someone who's steadfast. That's who you want to be. I mean, why else would you choose anything different? So, find who you want to be. Figure out what it is and how you can get there, like Edmond Dantes did, through learning skills, which gaining competency is a great way to move closer to becoming who you want to be. So find those skills, find your own path, and that's how you get out of fear. That's how you get out of fear. There's no other long-term solution than doing that. So that's about it. That's all I have on that topic at the moment. If I think of anything else, I'll make another video. But I love thinking about the Count of Monte Cristo because it's, like I said, there's so many different things that you can get out of that story alone. So many lessons, and just a great. It's a great story of how you can use your time to become better. I mean, think about it. If you read the story, if you go through it all, what he was able to accomplish within 8 years is nothing short of impressive, and I don't think it's at all impossible to do. And it's not just about the skills he attained or acquired, it's also about the man he became, how he developed his character. I mean, he was the man. There's no question about it. And I think that's what's actually worth pursuing. And I think that'll deliver you from any fear or anxiety, because it makes you think long term, makes you think big, makes you look at the bigger picture and find the deeper meaning that you need. So anyways, I hope you have a good day, and I will see you next time.